Welcome to episode 1 of our PMi-ACP certification study series. In this episode, we'll cover Agile Principles and Mindset, which falls under Domain 1 of the exam content outline. Question 1. What is the PMi-ACP certification and why should I pursue it? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Welcome to this comprehensive PMi-ACP certification study series. The PMI Agile Certified Practitioner, or PMi-ACP, is one of the most valuable credentials you can earn in today's project management landscape. Let me explain exactly what makes this certification unique and why it matters for your career. The PMi-ACP is issued by the Project Management Institute, the same organization behind the well-known PMP certification. However, there's a critical difference in philosophy between these two credentials. While the PMP has historically emphasized predictive, plan-driven processes outlined in the PMBOK guide, the PMi-ACP takes a fundamentally different approach. It is methodology agnostic, meaning it doesn't favor Scrum over Kanban or XP over Lean. Instead, it validates your ability to think in an agile way and apply the right practices to the right situations. What does this mean practically? The exam doesn't just test whether you can recite the Scrum Guide or list the 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto. It tests whether you have internalized what we call the Agile mindset. This is the ability to navigate complexity through adaptive, iterative, and incremental approaches. You'll face scenario-based questions that require you to demonstrate judgment, not just memorization. This certification is designed for practitioners who actively use Agile practices in their work or whose organizations are transitioning to Agile approaches. It serves as a bridge between the rigid, traditional waterfall methodologies that dominated the 20th century and the dynamic requirements of modern knowledge work. Software development, product management, marketing, HR transformation, and countless other fields now embrace Agile thinking. One concept you'll encounter repeatedly in this series is servant leadership. This represents a fundamental shift from command and control management to a facilitation-based approach that empowers self-organizing teams. If you currently manage by giving orders and expecting compliance, you'll need to rewire your thinking. The Agile leader asks, "What do you need from me?" rather than saying, "Here's what you need to do." Throughout this series, we'll cover all 7 domains tested on the exam, with practical scenarios and the reasoning behind correct answers. Question 2. How is the PMi-ACP exam structured and what should I expect on test day? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Let me walk you through exactly what you'll face when you sit for the PMi-ACP examination. Understanding the exam structure is crucial for your preparation strategy. The exam consists of 120 multiple-choice questions, and you have 3 hours to complete them. That works out to 90 seconds per question on average. Now here's something many candidates don't realize. Only 100 of those questions are actually scored. The remaining 20 are what PMI calls pre-test items. These are experimental questions that PMI is testing for potential use in future exams. They're scattered randomly throughout your test, and you have no way of knowing which ones they are. The practical implication? Treat every question as if it counts, because you can't tell the difference. The exam content is governed by what's called the Examination Content Outline, or ECO. This document segments Agile practice into 7 distinct performance domains, each with a specific weighting. Let me break these down for you. Domain 1 is Agile Principles and Mindset, weighted at 16%. This covers the manifesto values, the 12 principles, ethics, and methodology selection. It's the philosophical foundation everything else builds upon. Domain 2 is Value-Driven Delivery at 20%. This is the heaviest weighted domain. It covers return on investment, prioritization techniques, incremental delivery, and waste reduction. If you're short on study time, prioritize this domain. Domain 3 is stakeholder engagement at 17%. This covers collaboration, communication strategies, soft skills, and managing expectations. Agile is fundamentally about people, and this domain reflects that. Domain 4 is team performance at 16%. This addresses team formation, servant leadership, conflict resolution, and psychological safety. You'll learn about Tuckman's stages and how leadership style must adapt to team maturity. Domain 5 is adaptive planning at 12%. This covers rolling wave planning, estimation techniques like planning poker and story points, velocity tracking, and how to adapt plans based on feedback. Domain 6 is problem detection and resolution at 10%. This includes risk management, understanding cycle time and lead time, managing technical debt, and root cause analysis techniques. Domain 7 is continuous improvement at 9%. This covers retrospectives, process tailoring, and the Kaizen philosophy of ongoing incremental improvement. Notice something important. These domains are deeply interconnected. You cannot deliver value effectively without engaging stakeholders. You cannot engage stakeholders without a high-performing team, and none of this works without the Agile mindset as your foundation. When answering exam questions, you'll often need to consider multiple domains simultaneously. On test day, manage your time carefully. If you encounter a complex calculation or a confusing scenario, mark it and move on. You can return to marked questions if time permits. Don't let one difficult question derail your momentum. Question 3. What's the difference between being agile and doing agile, and why does this matter for the exam? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. This distinction is absolutely fundamental, and I want you to internalize it before we go any further. The difference between being agile and doing agile is perhaps the single most important concept for passing this exam and for succeeding as an agile practitioner in the real world. Doing agile means following the rituals. You hold daily stand-ups, you run 2-week sprints, you maintain a product backlog, you conduct retrospectives. From the outside, everything looks agile. You've got the Kanban board on the wall, the sticky notes are color-coded, and everyone knows when sprint planning happens. But here's the problem. You can execute all of these ceremonies perfectly while completely missing the point. I've seen organizations where the daily stand-up has become a 15-minute status report to the manager. Team members face the scrum master and recite what they did yesterday, what they'll do today, and any blockers, but they're not actually synchronizing with each other. They're performing a ritual for an audience. That's doing agile without being agile. Being agile means you've internalized the values and principles to the point where your instincts align with agile thinking. When a stakeholder comes to you mid-sprint with an urgent request, your first thought isn't that violates our process, but rather, how do we maximize value here? You understand that the sprint boundary exists to protect the team's focus, but you also recognize that responding to change is more important than following a plan. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine 2 Scrum Masters facing the same situation. A critical bug is discovered in production, and fixing it requires pulling a developer off their current sprint work. The first Scrum Master, who is doing Agile, says, "We can't accept new work mid-sprint. That's not how Scrum works. Log it in the backlog, and we'll prioritize it for next sprint." They're following the rules, but they've forgotten why those rules exist. The second Scrum Master, who is being agile, facilitates a quick conversation. They help the product owner assess the business impact. They work with the team to understand the technical implications. If the bug is truly critical, they might help negotiate removing a lower priority item from the current sprint to make room. They're applying judgment guided by principles, not blindly following procedures. For the exam, this translates to a specific test-taking strategy. When you encounter a scenario question, don't just look for the answer that follows the textbook process. Look for the answer that demonstrates agile values in action. If one option involves rigid adherence to a rule and another involves facilitating collaboration to find the best outcome, the facilitation answer is usually correct. Here's how the values manifest in exam questions. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools means that an answer involving direct conversation is usually better than one involving documentation or ticketing systems. Working software over comprehensive documentation means progress is measured by functional deliverables, not by completed specifications. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation means the relationship matters more than the agreement. Responding to change over following a plan means adaptation is a feature, not a bug. I want you to practice this shift in thinking as we work through each domain. Ask yourself, does this answer reflect someone who has internalized agile principles or someone who is just following a checklist? The exam is designed to distinguish between these two mindsets. One more thing, the Agile Manifesto explicitly states that there is value in the items on the right, meaning processes, documentation, contracts, and plans do have their place. The manifesto says we value the items on the left more, not that we reject the items on the right. This nuance matters. An answer that completely dismisses documentation or planning is probably wrong. The correct answer usually involves balance, with a preference for the agile value. Question 4. Can you explain the first value of the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and how it applies to exam scenarios? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Let's unpack the first and perhaps most important value of the Agile Manifesto. When we say we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, we're making a statement about what actually drives project success. Projects are fundamentally human endeavors. They succeed or fail based on the people involved and how effectively those people communicate, collaborate, and solve problems together. Processes and tools can support this, but they should never become obstacles to human connection. Think about what happens when process becomes more important than people. I've worked with organizations where developers needed to submit a ticket to talk to a business analyst sitting 10 feet away. The ticket would go into a queue, get triaged, and maybe 3 days later, they'd have a meeting scheduled. What could have been a 5-minute conversation became a week-long delay. The process, originally designed to manage workflow, had become a barrier to the interactions that actually move work forward. The agile response to this situation is clear. Remove the process that impedes communication. High bandwidth communication, specifically face-to-face conversation, dramatically reduces what I call the cost of misunderstanding. When you're talking to someone in person, you can read body language, ask clarifying questions immediately, sketch diagrams, and confirm understanding in real time. Compare that to email, where you write a message, wait for a response, realize they misunderstood, write another message, and days later, you're still not aligned. For the exam, watch for scenarios where a process creates a bottleneck between people who need to collaborate. The correct answer almost always involves facilitating direct interaction rather than enforcing the process. Here's an example scenario you might encounter. A developer has a question about a requirement and asks the Scrum Master what to do. The organization has a formal change request process that requires filling out a form and waiting for approval before any conversation with the product owner. What should the Scrum Master do? The distractor answers might include enforcing the change request process, documenting the question for the next planning meeting, or escalating to management. But the correct answer involves facilitating an immediate conversation between the developer and the product owner. The process exists to manage change, but a clarifying question isn't a change, it's communication. And even if it were a change, the Agile value prioritizes the interaction. Now, this doesn't mean we throw out all processes and tools. They have value. Version control systems, project management software, coding standards, and documentation templates all serve legitimate purposes. The key is that these tools should enable collaboration, not replace it. When you find yourself choosing between the tool and the person, choose the person. One more application. This value is why Agile emphasizes co-location when possible. When team members share a physical space, osmotic communication occurs naturally. You overhear relevant conversations. You can tap someone on the shoulder for a quick question, and information flows freely. For distributed teams, the agile approach is to maximize synchronous, high bandwidth interaction through video calls rather than relying on asynchronous text-based communication. Question 5. What does working software over comprehensive documentation really mean, and how do I apply this on the exam? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. The second value of the Agile Manifesto addresses one of the biggest wastes in traditional project management: documentation that nobody reads, that becomes obsolete before it's finished, and that creates an illusion of progress while the actual product remains unbuilt. When we say working software over comprehensive documentation, we're asserting that the primary measure of progress is a tangible, functional deliverable, not a requirements document, not a design specification, not a project plan with green status indicators, working software that a user can actually touch, test, and provide feedback on. Let me illustrate why this matters with a scenario I've seen play out many times. A project manager reports to executives that the project is 90% complete. They point to the completed requirements document, the approved design specs, the detailed project schedule, and the extensive test plans. Everything looks great on paper, but here's the question: how many working features does the customer have in their hands? If the answer is 0, then from an agile perspective, the project has delivered 0 value. That 90% completion is an illusion based on activity rather than outcomes. Agile flips this completely. Progress is measured by working increments delivered. If you've completed 3 out of 10 planned features, you're 30% done. But more importantly, you've already delivered real value that customers can use and provide feedback on. You're not waiting until the end to discover whether you built the right thing. This value has direct implications for documentation. Agile doesn't say documentation is bad or unnecessary. It says comprehensive documentation, meaning exhaustive, detailed documentation created up front before the work begins, often becomes waste. Instead, Agile favors what we call barely sufficient documentation. Document what's needed when it's needed, and let the documentation evolve alongside the product. For the exam, watch for questions about how to measure project progress or health. The correct answer will focus on delivered functionality, not on completed documentation or adherence to schedule. If a scenario describes a project with extensive documentation but no working product, that project is in trouble regardless of what the status reports say. Also watch for questions about documentation practices. The wrong answer often involves creating detailed specifications up front. The right answer usually involves documenting just enough to support the current work and evolving documentation as understanding grows. Here's a nuanced point: some documentation is genuinely necessary. Regulated industries may require certain documentation for compliance. Complex systems may need architectural documentation for maintenance. User manuals help customers. The Agile approach isn't to eliminate these, but to create them at the right time, in the right amount, and to keep them living documents that evolve with the product. The phrase I want you to remember is: documentation supports the product doesn't support the documentation. If a document isn't actively helping someone build, use, or maintain the software, question whether it needs to exist. Question 6. How should I understand customer collaboration over contract negotiation for the exam? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. The third value addresses the fundamental relationship between the team building the product and the customer who needs it. Traditional project management often treats this as an adversarial relationship, with contracts designed to assign blame and protect parties from each other. Agile proposes a radically different model. When we say customer collaboration over contract negotiation, we're advocating for partnership rather than protection. Instead of spending energy negotiating terms that penalize failure, we invest that energy in working together towards shared success. The customer and the team share the risk and the reward. Think about what traditional contracts often look like. They specify exactly what will be delivered, by when, for how much. Change orders are expensive and contentious. If requirements evolve, as they inevitably do, the contract becomes a weapon. The customer says you agreed to deliver feature X. The vendor says you agreed to the original scope. Lawyers get involved. Nobody wins, and the actual goal, delivering something valuable, gets lost in the conflict. Agile contracts work differently. They acknowledge that we cannot know everything at the beginning. They build in flexibility for scope to evolve as we learn more. They create incentives for both parties to optimize for value rather than compliance. Let me give you some specific examples you might encounter on the exam. One approach is the fixed price work package model, where instead of fixing the price for the entire project, you fix the price per iteration. The customer commits to funding 3 sprints, evaluates the results, and decides whether to continue. This reduces risk for both parties. Another approach is graduated fixed price. This creates incentives for early delivery by sharing the savings. If the project was estimated at $1 million and the team delivers the essential functionality for $800,000, the remaining $200,000 might be split between the vendor and customer. Everyone wins when value is delivered efficiently. A third model is money for nothing, change for free. This allows the customer to terminate the contract early if they've received sufficient value, paying a termination fee that's less than the remaining contract value. It also allows scope swaps, where the customer can replace a planned feature with a different feature of equivalent size at no additional cost. This flexibility means the customer always gets what they actually need, not just what they originally thought they needed. For exam scenarios, the key insight is that rigid adherence to an initial agreement often destroys value. If the market has changed, if new information has emerged, if the customer's understanding of their own needs has evolved, the agile response is to adapt the plan to maximize value. The contract should enable this rather than prevent it. Watch for answers that involve renegotiating scope collaboratively with the customer. These are usually correct. Watch for answers that involve enforcing the original contract terms regardless of changed circumstances. These are usually wrong. The underlying principle is that we measure success by customer satisfaction and delivered value, not by contractual compliance. A project that delivers exactly what the contract specified but fails to solve the customer's actual problem is not a success. Question 7. What does responding to change over following a plan mean, and why is this value so important? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. The fourth value of the Agile Manifesto might be the most frequently misunderstood. Some people interpret this as Agile means no planning. That's completely wrong. Agile involves extensive planning. The difference is in how we approach planning and how we respond when reality doesn't match our predictions. When we say responding to change over following a plan, we're recognizing a fundamental truth about complex work. The future is uncertain, and our ability to predict it is limited. Traditional project management treats change as a defect, a failure of the planning process. If requirements change, someone must have done a poor job gathering them initially. If estimates were wrong, someone should be held accountable. Agile treats change as an opportunity. The ability to pivot quickly based on new information is a competitive advantage, not a problem to be managed. When the market shifts, when customer feedback reveals unexpected insights, when a new technology emerges, the Agile team can adapt. Teams locked into rigid plans cannot. This has profound implications for how we plan. In Agile, planning is a verb, not a noun. It's something we do continuously, not something we complete once at the beginning. We plan in detail only for the immediate future, where our understanding is highest. We plan at a high level for the longer term, where uncertainty is greatest. This approach, called rolling wave planning, prevents us from investing effort in detailed plans that will certainly change. Think about the waste involved in traditional upfront planning. A team spends 3 months creating a detailed project plan with tasks, dependencies, and resource allocations mapped out for the next 18 months. By month 4, half of those details are already obsolete. By month 12, the plan bears little resemblance to actual work. yet the team feels obligated to follow it because so much effort went into creating it. The plan, meant to serve the project, has become the master. Agile teams hold their plans loosely. The sprint plan is detailed because it covers only the next 2 to 4 weeks. The release plan is less detailed, the product roadmap even less so. This isn't poor planning, it's honest planning that acknowledges the limits of prediction. For exam scenarios, watch for situations where following the original plan would deliver suboptimal results. The correct answer almost always involves adapting the plan based on new information, not rigidly adhering to what was originally agreed. Also, watch for questions about planning horizons. If a question asks how to handle a feature that might be needed in 6 months, the answer is not to create detailed specifications now. The answer is to capture the idea at a high level and defer detailed planning until we're closer to implementation, when we'll know more. One critical nuance: responding to change doesn't mean abandoning all discipline. Sprints have boundaries for a reason. Teams need some stability to do focused work. The art is in balancing the stability needed for execution with the flexibility needed for adaptation. We protect the team from constant disruption while remaining open to genuine course corrections. Question 8. Can you walk through the 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto and explain how they guide exam answers? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. The 12 principles behind the Agile Manifesto translate those 4 values into actionable guidance. I'm going to walk through each one and explain how it applies to exam scenarios. This is foundational content that will inform answers throughout all 7 domains. Principle 1. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. This principle establishes that customer satisfaction through delivered value is the ultimate goal. Notice the emphasis on early and continuous. We don't wait until the end to deliver value. We deliver increments throughout the project, generating return on investment sooner and creating opportunities for feedback. For exam questions, this means answers that delay delivery are usually wrong. If you can deliver partial value now, do it. Principle 2. Welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. This principle explicitly rejects the idea that change is bad. When requirements change, it means the customer has learned something. Maybe the market shifted. Maybe users revealed unexpected needs. Whatever the cause, the ability to incorporate that learning is a strength, not a weakness. The phrase competitive advantage is key. Organizations that can adapt outcompete those locked into rigid plans. For exam scenarios involving requirement changes, the answer rarely involves resisting or penalizing the change. Principle 3. Deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with a preference to the shorter timescale. This principle operationalizes continuous delivery. Note the explicit preference for shorter cycles. 2-week sprints are preferred to 8-week cycles. Why? Shorter cycles mean faster feedback, lower risk, and quicker course correction. Each delivery is an opportunity to validate that we're building the right thing. For the exam, answers that suggest longer planning or delivery cycles are usually less correct than those suggesting shorter ones. Principle 4. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This principle attacks organizational silos. Traditional models often separate business stakeholders from technical teams, with communication filtered through documents, project managers, or formal meetings. Agile demands direct daily collaboration. Business people understand what needs to be built. Developers understand what can be built and how. When they work together daily, the team builds what the business actually needs, rather than what was specified months ago. For exam questions, answers involving direct collaboration between business and technical roles are usually correct. Principle 5. Build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. This principle is the foundation of self-organization and servant leadership. Notice the 3 elements: motivated individuals, proper support, and trust. The leader's job is not to direct the work, but to enable it, remove obstacles, provide resources, and then get out of the way. For exam scenarios, answers where a leader takes control, assigns tasks, or closely supervises are usually wrong. Answers involving trust, empowerment, and support are usually right. Principle 6. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. This principle prioritizes high bandwidth communication. Information transmitted face-to-face includes words, tone, body language, immediate feedback, and clarification. Information transmitted via email loses most of that richness. Misunderstandings multiply in low bandwidth channels. For exam questions involving communication method choices, face-to-face or video conversations are usually the correct answer over documentation or asynchronous text. Principle 7. Working software is the primary measure of progress. This principle reiterates that outcomes matter more than activities. Status reports showing completed tasks mean nothing if no working software has been delivered. Sprint burn-down charts are useful, but they measure progress toward working software, not progress toward completed documentation. For exam questions about measuring project health or progress, answers focusing on functional deliverables are correct. Principle 8. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. This principle addresses the human cost of unsustainable work. Over time, crunch periods and artificial deadlines lead to burnout, defects, and turnover. The sustainable pace must be maintainable indefinitely, not just until the next release. For exam scenarios involving schedule pressure, answers that suggest overtime as a solution are usually wrong. Answers that Question 9. What is Scrum and what are its key roles, artifacts, and events? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. Scrum is the most widely adopted Agile framework, and you'll encounter many questions about it on the PMi-ACP exam. But here's something important to understand. Scrum is a container, a framework that provides structure while remaining compatible with other practices. Teams often combine Scrum's management practices with XP's engineering practices, or use Kanban visualization within a Scrum context. Scrum is built on 3 pillars: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Transparency means making work visible so everyone can see reality. Inspection means regularly examining progress and processes to detect variances. Adaptation means adjusting based on what inspection reveals. This is empirical process control, using actual data rather than predictions to guide decisions. Let's cover the 3 roles. The product owner represents the business and stakeholders. They're responsible for the what and the why. They own the product backlog, make prioritization decisions, and are accountable for maximizing return on investment. There is only one product owner, even if they gather input from many stakeholders. For exam questions, the product owner is the person who makes final decisions about product direction and priority. The Scrum Master is a servant leader and coach. They're responsible for the process. They remove impediments, facilitate Scrum events, and protect the team from external interference. Critically, the Scrum Master does not manage the team or assign tasks. They don't solve the team's problems for them. They coach the team to solve problems themselves. For exam scenarios, the Scrum Master facilitates rather than directs. The development team consists of cross-functional professionals who do the actual work. They're responsible for the how. They self-organize to turn backlog items into working increments. They own their estimates. No one can tell them how long something will take. The development team is typically 3 to 9 people, small enough to remain nimble, large enough to have the necessary skills. For exam questions, the team owns the technical approach and the estimates. Now, the artifacts. The product backlog is an emergent, prioritized list of everything needed in the product. It's never complete. It evolves as understanding grows. The sprint backlog is the subset of items the team commits to for the current sprint, plus their plan for delivering them. The increment is the sum of all completed backlog items meeting the definition of done, representing the current potentially shippable state of the product. Finally, the events. Sprint planning determines what will be delivered and how. The daily scrum is a 15-minute synchronization for the team, not a status report to management. The sprint review is an inspection of the increment with stakeholders to gather feedback. The sprint retrospective is an inspection of the team's process to identify improvements. For exam questions, remember that each event has a specific purpose. Using an event for the wrong purpose, like turning the daily scrum into a status report, is an anti-pattern. Question 10. What are the key practices from XP, Lean, and Kanban that I need to know? Take a moment to think about your answer before we continue. While Scrum addresses management practices, Extreme Programming, or XP, addresses engineering practices. For the exam, you need to understand several core XP practices. Pair programming involves two developers at one workstation. One types, called the driver, while the other reviews and thinks strategically, called the navigator. They switch roles frequently. This might seem inefficient using two people for one task, but research shows it increases quality and spreads knowledge across the team. Every piece of code has at least two people who understand it. Test-driven development, or TDD, means writing the test before writing the code. The cycle is red. The test fails because the code doesn't exist yet. Green, you write just enough code to pass the test. And refactor, you clean up the code while keeping tests passing. This ensures comprehensive test coverage and drives simple, focused implementations. For exam questions, TDD is associated with quality and technical excellence. Continuous integration means integrating code into a shared repository multiple times per day. Each integration triggers automated builds and tests, detecting integration problems immediately rather than at the end of a phase. This supports the principle of frequent delivery. Refactoring means improving code structure without changing behavior. It keeps the code base clean and maintainable, reducing technical debt and preserving agility. Now let's discuss Lean, which comes from the Toyota production system. Lean focuses on optimizing the whole system and eliminating waste. The 7 wastes are partially done work, which is inventory that has been started but not finished, extra processes like paperwork that adds no value, extra features, building things nobody asked for, sometimes called gold plating, task switching, which destroys productivity through context switching, waiting, any delay between steps, motion, unnecessary movement or navigation, and defects, any work that must be redone. For exam questions, identifying and eliminating waste is a lean response. If a scenario describes queues, waiting, or unnecessary handoffs, think lean waste elimination. Kanban is a method for visualizing work and managing flow. Its core practices include visualizing the workflow on a board, limiting work in progress or WIP, managing flow, making process policies explicit, and implementing feedback loops. The critical concept here is Little's Law. Cycle time equals work in progress divided by throughput. This means that to reduce how long work takes to complete, you must reduce the amount of work in progress. This is counterintuitive for many organizations that try to start everything at once. Kanban says, finish something before starting something new. For exam questions, Kanban is the answer when the scenario involves visualizing work, managing flow, or reducing cycle time through WIP limits. You should also have passing familiarity with Crystal, which emphasizes people over processes, DSDM, known for fixed time and cost with variable scope, and the Moscow prioritization technique, and feature-driven development, which is model-driven with very short iterations. That concludes episode 1. We covered 10 important concepts. Take time to review these questions and answers, and practice applying these concepts to scenario-based questions. In the next episode, we'll continue exploring the PMi-ACP exam domains.